The galaxy was vast, an endless expanse of stars and planets that seemed to stretch beyond comprehension. Humanity had long since left its cradle on Earth, spreading across the cosmos in search of resources, knowledge, and survival. Among those who ventured into this unknown frontier were soldiers, men and women forged by necessity, trained for combat, and sent to protect humanity's fragile foothold among the stars. One such soldier was Eric Vallon, a grizzled veteran with more scars than he cared to count. His dark brown beard, thick and wild as though it had grown untamed through years of hardship, framed his weathered face like armor against the harshness of space. It wasn't just his appearance that set him apart. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that bordered on arrogance but never quite crossed over. Eric wasn't one to boast or make grand speeches. Instead, he let his actions speak for him, which they often did loudly enough. Eric's unit had been dispatched to investigate reports of unusual activity near the edge of human-controlled territory. The mission briefing had been vague at best. Strange energy signatures, unexplained disappearances, and whispers of alien lifeforms far more advanced than anything encountered before. To most, it would have sounded like a suicide run, but not to Eric. He'd seen too much, survived too many battles, to believe that any threat could truly be insurmountable. As their ship descended onto the planet designated PX-429, a world cloaked in perpetual twilight, they prepared themselves for whatever awaited them. The atmosphere outside was thick with sulfuric clouds, and jagged mountains loomed ominously in the distance. Yet none of this fazed Eric. He adjusted the strap of his rifle over his shoulder, stroked his beard thoughtfully, and muttered under his breath, "Let's see what kind of trouble we're walking into now." What no one knew, not even Eric himself, was that this mission would change everything. Little did they realize that deep beneath the surface of PX-429 lay a civilization unlike any other, ruled by beings whose beauty and power defied all logic. And when these two worlds collided, nothing would ever be the same again. Deep within the crystalline caverns of PX-429, hidden from the prying eyes of the universe, resided a species so ancient and enigmatic that their very existence seemed like myth. They called themselves the Luminari, creatures born from light and shadow, their bodies shimmering with hues of gold and silver that shifted depending on their mood. At the heart of their society stood Queen Solara, the embodiment of their race's elegance and strength. Her presence commanded reverence, her voice carrying the weight of millennia. Solara was not merely beautiful. She radiated an aura of regality that transcended physical form. Her elongated limbs moved with fluid grace, each step a dance choreographed by eons of evolution. Her golden skin sparkled faintly under the bioluminescent glow of the cavern walls, while her luminous eyes, large, almond-shaped orbs tinged with iridescent blues, seemed capable of peering directly into the soul. She wore intricate adornments crafted from materials unknown to humans, jewelry that pulsed softly with an inner light, echoing the rhythm of her heartbeat. To her people, Solara was both goddess and guardian, revered as the pinnacle of their species' achievements. But despite her divine status, she harbored doubts. Questions about her own supremacy gnawed at her mind. For centuries, the Luminari had believed themselves to be the ultimate expression of life in the galaxy. Their mastery over technology, telepathy, and even time itself had cemented their belief in their dominance. Yet recent events had shaken that certainty. Whispers of other civilizations, lesser ones perhaps, yet undeniably intelligent, had begun to reach her ears. These rumors unsettled her, planting seeds of curiosity and unease. And then came the day when seismic vibrations rippled through the caverns, signaling an intrusion upon their sacred land. Reports poured in from scouts. The intruders were bipedal, crude in comparison to the Luminari, yet armed with weapons capable of immense destruction. Intrigued and wary, Solara decided to observe them herself. As she ascended to the upper chambers where surveillance crystals displayed images of the surface, her sharp gaze fell upon one figure in particular, a human soldier with a rugged appearance and a formidable beard. Something stirred within her, a sensation she couldn't immediately name. It wasn't fear, nor was it disdain. Instead, it felt like a mixed with confusion, as if some primal instinct recognized this being as something extraordinary. She leaned closer to the crystal, studying every detail of his face, the lines carved by experience, the defiant tilt of his jaw. Was this what perfection looked like? Or was it simply arrogance masked as confidence? Whatever it was, it unnerved her and fascinated her, in equal measure. For the first time in centuries, Queen Solara trembled, not out of weakness but out of wonder. Could it be possible that this creature, this human, represented a new apex of existence? So what did that mean for her people? For her reign? Eric Vallon crouched behind a jagged rock formation, scanning the horizon with practiced precision. The air smelled acrid, heavy with the metallic tang of sulfur, but he barely noticed. His focus was absolute, honed by countless missions and skirmishes. Beside him, Lieutenant Rhea Callan adjusted her visor, her movements brisk and efficient. She glanced at Eric, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You think we're being watched?" she asked, her voice low. "Doesn't matter if I think," Eric replied, stroking his beard absently. "We are being watched. Always are." Rhea rolled her eyes but didn't argue. She knew better than to question Eric's instincts. They'd saved their squad more times than she could count. Still, unease prickled at her spine. Something about this place felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, but unnatural. Like the ground beneath their feet might swallow them whole at any moment. Behind them, Corporal Jace Torin checked the readings on his handheld scanner. "Energy spikes are increasing," he said, his tone clipped. "Whatever's down here, it's big." "No kidding," muttered Private Dax Novik, adjusting the strap of his plasma rifle. "Big, weird, and probably wants us dead." Eric shot him a warning glance. "Keep your chatter to yourself, Novik. We don't know what's listening." The group fell silent, tension crackling between them like static electricity. Moments passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Dust rained down from above, and shards of crystalline rock dislodged from the cliffs around them, clattering to the ground. "What the hell is that?" Rhea hissed, gripping her weapon tightly. Before anyone could answer, a blinding flash of light erupted from the canyon ahead. It wasn't natural, this wasn't lightning or fire. It was pure, radiant brilliance, pulsating with colors that defied description. Shapes emerged from the glow, humanoid yet impossibly graceful, their forms shimmering like liquid gold. The squad froze, caught off guard by the sheer otherworldliness of what they were seeing. "Hostiles!" Jace shouted, raising his scanner higher. But Eric held up a hand, silencing him. "Hold your fire," he ordered, his voice steady despite the surreal scene unfolding before them. "They haven't attacked." The figures stepped forward, their movements fluid and deliberate. At their center stood a woman, or something resembling one, whose presence demanded attention. She was taller than the others, her radiant skin glowing brighter, her eyes wide and luminous. Her gaze swept over the squad, lingering briefly on each member, until finally settling on Eric. Time seemed to slow. Eric felt the weight of her stare, piercing through layers of armor and resolve. He straightened slightly, meeting her gaze head-on. There was no fear in him, only a calm readiness. Around him, his team shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to react. But Eric remained still, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his combat knife. The alien queen tilted her head, studying him intently. Her mouth parted as though she meant to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, a ripple of emotion passed across her features. Curiosity, uncertainty, and something else Eric couldn't quite name. Awe, fear, respect. Beside him, Rhea whispered, "What do we do?" Eric didn't look away from the queen. "Wait," he said simply. "Let's see what she wants." For several long moments, neither side moved. The tension was palpable, charged with the potential for violence or understanding. Then, slowly, the queen raised a hand, palm facing outward in what could only be interpreted as a gesture of peace. Behind her, the other aliens mirrored her movement, their expressions unreadable but calm. "Well," Dax muttered under his breath, "if this isn't the weirdest thing I've ever seen." Eric ignored him, keeping his eyes locked on the queen. Despite the strangeness of the situation, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter mattered, that whatever happened next would shape not just their mission, but the future of humanity itself. The silence stretched taut, broken only by the faint hum of energy radiating from the crystalline structures around them. The queen's luminous eyes bore into Eric's, as though trying to unravel the mysteries hidden behind his weathered face. Eric, unfazed by her scrutiny, returned her gaze with unwavering composure. His beard twitched slightly as he shifted his weight, a subconscious gesture that somehow made him appear even more imposing. To Solara, it was as though this simple act carried the weight of an entire civilization's resolve. Solara's thoughts raced. Who was this creature? Why did his mere presence evoke such a visceral reaction within her? In all her centuries as queen, she had never encountered anyone or anything that challenged her perception of superiority. Yet here stood this man, rough-hewn and battle-worn, exuding an aura of quiet dominance that clashed violently with her preconceived notions of lesser species. Her trembling intensified, though not from fear. It stemmed from a profound sense of intrigue mingled with doubt. Eric, sensing the unspoken dialogue unfolding between them, took a cautious step forward. His boots crunched against the rocky terrain, the sound reverberating through the cavern like a challenge. "You're staring," he said, his voice gravelly yet measured. "If you've got something to say, spit it out." His words hung in the air, untranslated but unmistakably confrontational. Solara blinked, startled by the audacity of his tone. No one had ever addressed her with such casual disregard for her station. Among her people, deference was ingrained in every interaction. And yet, this human dared to meet her eye, to speak as though they were equals. The absurdity of it sparked something unexpected within her. Amusement. Her lips curved upward ever so slightly, a subtle smile that illuminated her already radiant features. She pointed at Eric, then mimicked stroking her chin, gesturing toward his beard. Though no words passed between them, her meaning was clear. This. Eric frowned, glancing down at his beard before looking back at her. "Yeah, it's a beard," he said dryly. "What of it?" Rhea stifled a laugh beside him, earning a sharp glare from Dax. Even in the midst of intergalactic diplomacy, or whatever this bizarre exchange qualified as, Eric's blunt humor managed to lighten the mood. Solara, however, remained focused. She reached out a slender hand, her fingers glowing faintly, and beckoned him closer. "Oh no," Jace muttered under his breath. "Don't go near her, sir." Eric hesitated but ultimately shrugged. "Relax, kid. I'm not planning on getting abducted." Stepping cautiously forward, he stopped just within arm's length of the queen. Up close, her beauty was almost overwhelming, her golden skin shimmering with an ethereal quality that defied explanation. Still, Eric refused to let himself be intimidated. Crossing his arms over his chest, he quirked an eyebrow. "All right, Your Majesty. What's so fascinating about my face?" Solara tilted her head again, her expression softening further. With deliberate slowness, she extended her hand toward his beard, as though seeking permission to touch it. Eric flinched instinctively but held his ground. When her fingertips brushed against the coarse hair, a jolt of energy surged through both of them, a connection neither expected nor understood. For Solara it was revelatory. The texture of his beard, coarse yet oddly comforting, contrasted sharply with the smooth perfection of her own skin. It was foreign, yes, but also strangely compelling. For Eric, the sensation was equally disorienting. Her touch was cool and electric, sending shivers down his spine despite the oppressive heat of the cavern. "Well," Eric muttered, pulling back slightly. "That's a new one." Solara withdrew her hand, her smile widening fractionally. She clasped her hands together and inclined her head in what could only be described as gratitude, or perhaps admiration. Around her, the other luminari exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable but tinged with curiosity. Back among the humans, Rhea leaned closer to Jace. "Do you think she likes him?" Jace snorted. "More like she thinks he's dinner." Dax smirked. "Or dessert." Eric shot them all a warning look over his shoulder. Turning back to Solara, he cleared his throat. "Look, I don't know what's going on here, but if you're trying to start a conversation, maybe try pointing less and talking more." Solara's brow furrowed slightly, her luminous eyes narrowing as though considering his words. Then, to everyone's astonishment, she placed a hand over her heart and bowed deeply. It was a gesture of respect, one that left the squad utterly baffled. "Okay," Rhea whispered. "I officially have no idea what's happening anymore." Neither did Eric, but he wasn't about to admit it. Straightening his posture, he gave the queen a curt nod. "All right, Your Highness, let's keep this party moving. You want to show us around? Or should we just stand here gawking at each other all day?" Solara straightened, her lips quirking into what might have been a smirk. Gesturing for them to follow, she turned and began leading the way deeper into the crystalline labyrinth. As the squad hesitantly trailed behind her, Eric couldn't help but notice the way her retinue regarded him, with a mix of awe and suspicion. Whatever impression he'd made, it was clear that his presence had disrupted the delicate balance of their world. And as they ventured further into the alien domain, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The journey through the crystalline labyrinth was unlike anything the squad had ever experienced. The walls of the cavern shimmered with an iridescent glow, their surfaces alive with shifting patterns that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the Queen's footsteps. Each step they took echoed faintly, blending with the soft hum of energy that permeated the air. It was as though the very environment responded to Solara's presence, bending to her will in ways that defied human understanding. Eric kept pace beside her, his boots crunching against the uneven terrain, while the rest of the squad followed closely behind. Rhea occasionally glanced at the glowing formations, her scanner humming softly as it struggled to make sense of the alien technology surrounding them. Jace muttered under his breath, jotting notes on his datapad, while Dax alternated between marveling at the sights and nervously clutching his rifle. The tension among them was palpable, a mixture of awe and unease that only grew stronger with each passing moment. Solara led them deeper into the cavern, her movements fluid and deliberate. Every so often, she would pause to examine something. A crystalline structure, a floating orb of light, or even one of her own attendants, and then continue onward without explanation. Her demeanor was calm, almost serene, yet there was an undercurrent of urgency in her actions, as though she were guiding them towards something important. At one point, the group entered a massive chamber where the ceiling soared high above them, disappearing into darkness. Suspended in the center of the room was a colossal sphere of light, its surface swirling with colors that shifted and danced like liquid fire. The sight was mesmerizing, drawing gasps of wonder from the squad. Even Eric found himself momentarily transfixed, though he quickly schooled his expression into one of indifference. "This must be their version of a throne room," Rhea whispered, her voice barely audible over the ambient hum. "Or a death trap," Dax muttered darkly. Solara approached the sphere, raising her hands as though conducting an invisible orchestra. The light responded instantly, dimming slightly before splitting into beams that illuminated various parts of the chamber. One beam landed on Eric, causing him to squint and raise a hand to shield his eyes. Another swept over the squad, bathing them in a warm, golden glow that felt oddly comforting. "What's she doing?" Jace asked, his voice tinged with apprehension. "No idea," Eric replied, his tone clipped. "But I don't think she's showing us her vacation photos." Solara turned to face them, her luminous eyes locking onto Eric once more. She gestured toward the sphere, then pointed at him, repeating the motion several times. The message was clear. She wanted him to approach it. "Great," Eric muttered, stepping forward reluctantly. Because nothing says, "trust exercise," like walking into a giant ball of alien energy. Rhea grabbed his arm before he could move too far. "Are you sure about this, sir?" "Not even remotely," Eric admitted, shrugging off her grip. "But sitting here staring at it won't get us answers." He walked toward the sphere, his steps slow and deliberate. As he drew closer, the light intensified, casting sharp shadows across his face and highlighting the rugged contours of his beard. The closer he got, the more the sphere seemed to resonate with him, its colors shifting in response to his presence. When he finally stood directly beneath it, the light enveloped him completely, cocooning him in a radiant embrace. For a brief moment, everything went silent. Then, a flood of images and sensations overwhelmed Eric's senses. He saw flashes of unfamiliar landscapes, heard echoes of voices speaking languages he couldn't comprehend, and felt emotions that weren't his own: awe, fear, longing, triumph. It was as though the sphere was communicating with him, sharing fragments of the Luminary's history and culture in a way that bypassed language entirely. When the light finally receded, Eric staggered backward, blinking rapidly to clear his vision. The squad rushed to his side, concern etched on their faces. "Eric, are you okay?" Rhea asked, steadying him with a firm grip. "I'll live," he replied, shaking his head to dispel the lingering disorientation. "Though I think I just got a crash course in alien anthropology." Solara watched him intently, her expression unreadable. She stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was gentle yet firm, conveying a sense of gratitude, or perhaps reassurance. Whatever had transpired between Eric and the sphere, it had clearly deepened the connection between him and the Queen. As the squad regrouped, Jace broke the silence. "So what now?" Eric glanced at Solara, then back at his team. "Now," he said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of questions swirling in his mind. "We figure out why she brought us here and whether we can trust her." Behind them, the sphere pulsed once more, its light dimming to a faint glow. Somewhere in the depths of the cavern, a low rumble echoed, signaling that their journey was far from over. The revelation of the sphere left the squad grappling with conflicting emotions. For Eric, the weight of what he'd witnessed was staggering. A torrent of alien memories and emotions now intertwined with his own consciousness. He tried to shake it off, focusing instead on the task at hand, but the lingering impressions of the Luminary's struggles and triumphs haunted him. Beside him, Rhea kept stealing glances, her brow furrowed with concern. "Sir," she finally ventured. "What did you see in there?" Eric hesitated, rubbing his beard thoughtfully. "It's complicated," he said, choosing his words carefully. "They're not just shiny aliens with fancy tech. They've got history, pain, loss. Hell, they might even have hope." Dax snorted. "Hope? From glitter fairies? Sure thing." "Watch your mouth," Eric snapped, sharper than intended. "These glitter fairies could wipe us out before we even blink. Respect that." The rebuke silenced Dax, but the tension simmered beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Solara gestured for them to continue deeper into the labyrinth. Her movements were deliberate, almost urgent now, as though time was slipping away. Eric followed, his boots crunching against the crystalline floor, his mind racing with possibilities. What did she want from them? Why had she singled him out? As they navigated the twisting passages, the air grew heavier, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of Eric's neck stand on end. The squad scanners flickered sporadically, unable to process the alien technology surrounding them. Jace cursed under his breath, tapping furiously at his datapad. "Something's interfering with our gear," he muttered. "If we need to fight, we're flying blind." "We won't need to fight," Eric replied firmly, though even he wasn't entirely convinced. "Not unless they give us a reason." Rhea shot him a skeptical look. "And how do we know they won't?" "Because she hasn't killed us yet," Eric said, jerking his thumb toward Solara. "That counts for something." Before Rhea could respond, the group emerged into another vast chamber, this one dominated by a towering structure that resembled a tree made of liquid light. Its branches stretched upward, branching into countless tendrils that pulsed with energy. At its base stood a circular platform, etched with intricate patterns that shimmered faintly. Solara approached the platform, turning to face the squad with an expectant expression. "She wants us to step on it," Eric guessed, eyeing the structure warily. "Anyone else getting a bad vibe about this?" "It's either a transport or a trap," Rhea said, her hand resting on her weapon. "Take your pick." "Transport," Eric decided, stepping forward. "If it's a trap, we'll deal with it when it happens." The squad exchanged uneasy glances but followed Eric onto the platform. As soon as they were all assembled, Solara raised her hands, and the tree-like structure erupted into a cascade of light. The platform vibrated beneath their feet, and a low hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. Eric clenched his fists, bracing himself for whatever came next. Then, without warning, the world dissolved around them. When the light faded, they found themselves standing in an entirely different location. A sprawling cityscape carved from the same crystalline material as the caverns. Towering spires rose into the sky, their surfaces alive with shifting colors. Alien figures moved through the streets, their movements fluid and purposeful. Some paused to stare at the humans, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. "Where the hell are we now?" Dax muttered, gripping his rifle tightly. "Looks like downtown Glitterville," Rhea quipped, though her voice lacked humor. Eric scanned the area, his gaze landing on Solara. She stood a few paces ahead, her posture relaxed yet commanding. Around her, the other Luminari formed a loose perimeter, their glowing eyes watching the humans with a mixture of fascination and caution. "They're testing us," Eric said quietly, "seeing how we react." "React to what?" Jace asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "This whole thing feels like one big guessing game." Before Eric could respond, a sudden commotion erupted nearby. A group of Luminari, their forms darker and more angular than the others, pushed through the crowd. Their leader, a male figure with sharp features and an aura of menace, stepped forward, addressing Solara in a series of melodic tones that resonated through the air. "He doesn't look happy," Rhea observed. "Understatement of the year," Eric muttered. Solara responded calmly, her voice steady and measured. The exchange grew heated, the newcomer gesturing angrily toward the humans. Eric felt the tension rise, the air crackling with barely contained hostility. Whatever disagreement was unfolding, it was clear that not everyone shared Solara's apparent faith in humanity. Finally, the newcomer turned to face the squad, his glowing eyes narrowing into slits. He stepped closer, his movements predatory, until he was standing mere inches from Eric. For a moment, the two locked gazes, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on everyone present. "Easy," Eric said, his voice low but firm. "We're guests here." The alien sneered, baring teeth that gleamed like polished metal. Then, without warning, he lashed out, his hand striking Eric across the chest with enough force to send him stumbling backward. The squad reacted instantly, weapons drawn and aimed at the aggressor. "Stand down," Eric barked, raising a hand to stop them. "We're not starting a war over a damn slap." The alien smirked, clearly amused by Eric's restraint. Solara intervened, placing herself between them and speaking sharply to her subordinate. The tension eased slightly, though the animosity remained palpable. "What was that about?" Rhea demanded, lowering her weapon reluctantly. Eric straightened, brushing dust off his armor. "Politics," he said grimly. "Same old story, just with shinier players." As the group regrouped, it became clear that their presence had ignited a conflict within the Luminari ranks. Whether Solara's trust in humanity would prevail, or if the dissenters would gain the upper hand, remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. Their journey was far from over, and the stakes had just gotten higher. The chaos in the crystalline city simmered but never fully dissipated. Tensions between Solara and the dissenting faction of Luminari grew palpable, their disagreements over humanity's presence threatening to boil over into outright conflict. Yet amidst the turmoil, something unexpected and profoundly personal began to unfold. Solara found herself increasingly drawn to Eric Valen. It wasn't just his rugged appearance or the defiant glint in his eyes. It was the way he carried himself with quiet confidence, unshaken by the alien world around him. His beard, so foreign and striking against the smooth perfection of her people, fascinated her endlessly. In a society where physical attributes were honed to an almost sterile elegance, Eric's coarse, untamed facial hair symbolized raw individuality, a trait she had never encountered before. To her, it was magnetic. At first, Solara tried to suppress these feelings. She was their queen, after all, bound by duty to her people and their survival. But every time Eric spoke, his gravelly voice cutting through diplomatic tensions, or every time he stroked his beard in thought, her resolve weakened further. There was a primal allure to him that transcended logic, stirring emotions within her that even centuries of wisdom couldn't contain. One evening, as the squad rested in a designated area of the city under Solara's protection, she approached Eric alone. The others were scattered nearby, tinkering with equipment or discussing strategy. But Eric sat apart, leaning against a crystalline pillar and cleaning his rifle. His focus was absolute, his movements methodical, yet when he noticed Solara standing a few paces away, he paused and looked up. "Something on your mind, Your Majesty?" he asked, his tone laced with dry humor. Solara hesitated, unsure how to articulate what she felt. Her luminous eyes searched his face, lingering on the lines etched by years of hardship and the wild tangle of his beard. Finally, she gestured toward him, then mimicked stroking her own chin, an action she had observed humans do when admiring beards. Then, placing a hand over her heart, she tilted her head slightly, as if asking permission to speak without words. Eric raised an eyebrow, setting the rifle aside. "All right, let's hear it. What's so special about the beard?" She smiled faintly, her expression softening. Reaching out tentatively, she touched his beard again, this time letting her fingers linger. Her touch sent a shiver down his spine, though he masked it with a grunt of feigned indifference. "It's just hair," he said gruffly. "Nothing fancy." To Solara, however, it was anything but ordinary. She shook her head gently, her glowing eyes conveying admiration and affection. Then, surprising both of them, she knelt before him, bowing her head in a gesture of reverence, and perhaps something more. Eric blinked, taken aback. "Whoa, hold on. You're the queen. Kneeling isn't really necessary." Solara rose gracefully, her smile widening. With deliberate motions, she placed one hand over her heart and extended the other toward him, palm upward, a universal sign of offering. Eric stared at her, his brow furrowing. "What are you saying?" Though no words passed between them, the meaning was clear. Solara wanted him. not just as an ally, but as a partner. Her culture may have been vastly different from his, but love, or whatever emotion burned brightly in her chest, needed no translation. For a moment, Eric was speechless. He glanced back at his squad, who were watching the exchange with varying degrees of confusion and amusement. Rhea gave him a thumbs up, while Dax mimed gagging noises. Ignoring them, Eric turned back to Solara, scratching his beard thoughtfully. "You realize this is insane, right?" he said finally. "I'm a soldier. You're you." Solara nodded, her expression unwavering. She stepped closer, taking his hand in hers and pressing it to her chest. Her heartbeat pulsed beneath his fingertips, steady and strong. Whatever doubts she might have harbored about interspecies relationships vanished in that instant. This human, with his rough edges and unyielding spirit, had captured her heart completely. Eric sighed, shaking his head. "All right, fine. If you're willing to put up with my sarcasm and bad jokes, I guess I can try not to embarrass myself too much." Her radiant smile lit up the dimly lit chamber, and for the first time since their arrival, the tension in the air seemed to lift. Wordlessly, Solara led him to a ceremonial hall, where the union was formalized in front of her people. The ceremony was unlike anything Eric had ever experienced. A blend of shimmering lights, melodic tones, and ancient rituals that left him feeling both awestruck and slightly overwhelmed. By the end of it, he was officially wedded to the Golden Queen of the Luminari. Life after the wedding was a whirlwind of adjustment, for both Eric and the Luminari. At first, there were whispers among Solara's people, skepticism about her choice of mate. But as they witnessed Eric's loyalty, strength, and occasional bursts of humor, many began to see why their queen had fallen for him. Even the dissenting factions softened their stance, unable to deny the bond that had formed between the two leaders. As the years passed, Eric and Solara welcomed a brood of children into their unconventional family. Their offspring were a unique blend of human and Luminari traits. Golden skin that shimmered faintly, luminous eyes that mirrored their mother's, and, much to everyone's delight, the occasional hint of facial hair inherited from their father. These hybrids became symbols of unity, bridging the gap between the two species and fostering peace across the galaxy. In their downtime, Eric taught Solara the art of growing a proper beard, though she preferred touching his, while she introduced him to the wonders of Luminari technology and telepathy. They ruled together, balancing each other's strengths and weaknesses, creating a legacy that would endure for generations. And though their lives were far from ordinary, they embraced the chaos with open arms, knowing that love, and occasionally a good beard joke, could conquer even the most impossible challenges.